How does Taiwan establish diplomatic relations with a country that's not a country?
I think this move is quite provocative, and it has to be understood within much broader context of the heightening tension between Washington and Beijing. I think it works for Washington to have Taiwan, a country that is selling arms, to come much more closer to an area in which China also has a military base in Djibouti, but more importantly, to assert Taiwanese sovereignty forcefully. And some of the discussions are to do with the possibility of a military base, something that is quite dangerous for the continent. And given the fact that the Horn of Africa is marred with endless crises.
So what are the consequences? Let's start with Somaliland itself, if there are any, because they're desperate to get their statehood recognized. Might this be a problem?
Indeed. I think it's really a genuine move by the Somaliland leadership. I think since 1991, they've done their very best to stabilize that part, northern Somalia region. They're quite stable. There have been few disturbances here and there, but overall, compared to most countries or region of that part of the world, I think they're quite stable. They've held quite a number of elections, and the economy is doing quite well based on Somaliland people who are all over the world sending in money. And unfortunately, the entire region, as well as the continent, hasn't agreed to their succeeding from Somaliland. So from Somalia since 1991. So I think this brings a challenge to that leadership, and perhaps this some of that attempts to try to draw attention to their quest for statehood.
Beijing will not be happy, and I have no doubt that pressure will come to bear. How might that come through, and will that eventually force this relationship broken?
Yeah, these entities, I mean, if you look at both Taiwan as well as Somaliland, they are not recognized by the AU. And what they're going to do is just to destabilize the region, given the fact that Somaliland itself and the port of Barbara, it's quite important. It is an entry into the Middle East, the rest of East Africa, and the Horn of Africa itself, particularly Ethiopia. More countries are getting involved to a region that is very tiny, and their capability of handling these big giants, I think, is going to be a problem. And one will expect a lot of tension and destabilization in the long run if they don't handle this matter
So,
quite delicately.
will the African Union get involved in this?
Uh, when it comes to AU, it hasn't pronounced itself on this matter, but one would expect Somalia, as it stabilized. I mean, the last 6 months, a year, I think there's been stability in Somalia. And the more Somalia put its house together and stabilize, I think it will demand more in terms of unification of the broader Somalia, including Somaliland itself. So you might get a bit of tension between Somalia and Taiwan, and unhappiness within the AU.
But the AU, what can they do when they don't even recognize Somaliland as a country? So we call it diplomatic relations, but it can't really be recognized as that. So where's the harm?
Um, it's the Somaliland leadership won't have any hearing. I think for them to really prosper and gain support, they really need the AU. I think it's the major, as well as the East Africa community as well. The IGAD, those are important organizations that they need to really draw more support from. before going to United Nations. But as it stands, they seem to be so desperate to an extent of bringing in a country that is not recognized just by one country, which is Eswatini. So this does not bode well for the continent, and it's an unwise move, and one would expect that this relationship won't go any further.
What's in it for Taiwan, apart from a photo op?
For Taiwan itself, I think it is looking at provoking China on one hand, given the tension between Taiwan and mainland China. So I think it's taking advantage of this. Anyway, Taiwan is backed up by United States. So these are some of the issues. I think the problem for the continent is that we are bringing in global attention much more closer to our continent.
Right.
We don't need that. And if we look back in history, during the Cold War, we had some of the most fierce battles that were fought between the then Soviet Union and US. And those battles were right there in Somaliland, between Ethiopia and Somalia. That war was quite intense. If you go there, for some of us who are privileged being there, you see the area as a museum of the Cold War, and we can't go back to that scenario of a new Cold War and Africa being the place in which big giants play their games.
All right, so what you're suggesting is that we probably will be forced to choose between the US and China over these matters.
Indeed, and it is dangerous for us to be in that kind of a situation. It should be a question of neither Washington nor Beijing, and the African continent need to consolidate its own peace and security and stick to matters of development and have friends both in Washington and Beijing and everywhere else, as the AU is leading quite well in terms of partnership with all countries in the world to help us deal with our own Agenda 2063.
All right, and coming closer to home, Eswatini is another country that defied China and set up these diplomatic relations with Taipei. Is it something that can last? Are they starting to feel the pressure as well?
In the long run, I think they'll give in. Chances are very high, given that all countries on the African continent have already maintained the mainland China as the sole responsible government. And one would expect Swaziland in the long run, but that is a decision that the Eswatini leadership has to take. But if we look at the history of other smaller countries such as Eswatini, in the end, they'll give in, given the fact that this comes with incentives, whether in infrastructure development, education, and given the crisis in Eswatini itself, I think chances are high that they will just wake up to a situation in which they have switched to mainland China.
All right, and President Ramaphosa as AU chair, might this be on his desk and perhaps a phone call to Somaliland might be in the offing?
It's unlikely, given the fact that this is not a recognized state, and therefore, unless something big happens in terms of conflicts, the chair of the AU would work with regional organizations such as IGAD to bring peace to all parties. But as it stands, I really don't think it will be the main issue, given the fact that the main agenda for President Ramaphosa as chair of the AU is silencing the gun, and time is running out. We have so many guns that are on in Mozambique, in Libya, and so many other areas that he probably is spending more time making calls.